The first time I saw the eviction notice taped to her door, it felt like someone had taped it to my chest instead. The paper flapped in the cold afternoon wind, a bright, cruel rectangle against the faded brown siding of the duplex we shared. Cardboard boxes were stacked beside her porch, and she stood there staring at them like they were pieces of a life she didn't recognize anymore. When I told my evicted neighbor to move in with me, I didn't expect her to laugh bitterly and say it wasn't funny. I didn't expect that I would have to prove I meant it, but sometimes the smallest acts of kindness demand the biggest courage. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of ordinary people helping each other, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Full stories like this deserve to be heard. Her name was Hannah. She had moved in next door about a year earlier with her 8-year-old son, Milo. I remember the first time I saw them hauling in mismatched furniture from a borrowed pickup truck. She had smiled at me with the tired optimism of someone trying to start over. Milo had waved, clutching a small dinosaur like it was his anchor in an unfamiliar world. They weren't loud. They weren't trouble. They were the kind of neighbors who kept to themselves but always nodded hello. Over time, our lives overlapped in small ways. I shoveled her walkway during the first snowfall. She brought over banana bread one Sunday afternoon when she learned I worked from home and probably forgot to eat real food. Milo occasionally chased a soccer ball into my yard, apologizing with wide, anxious eyes. I learned in fragments that Hannah worked at a local diner, pulling double shifts whenever she could. Her husband had left 2 years earlier, and child support arrived inconsistently, like an afterthought. She never complained outright, but exhaustion clung to her. There were nights I heard her car pull in well past midnight, the engine idling a few seconds longer than necessary, as if she was gathering the strength to go inside and keep being strong. The eviction notice changed everything. I found out later that the diner had cut staff after business slowed. Hannah's hours disappeared almost overnight. Savings, if there had been any, evaporated into rent, groceries, and school supplies. She fell 1 month behind. Then 2. The landlord, who had inherited the duplex and lived in another state, didn't want excuses. He wanted payment. When it didn't come, the notice did. That afternoon, I stepped outside with a cup of coffee I suddenly didn't want. She was standing in front of the door, her hand resting against the wood like she was saying goodbye to something alive. Milo sat on the steps, unusually quiet. The boxes around them looked like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. I remember the way my voice sounded too casual for the weight of the moment when I said she didn't have to go far. I told her she could move in with me. I said it simply as if I were offering to water her plants. She blinked at me, confusion flickering into something sharper. She let out a short, humorless laugh and told me that wasn't funny. She had enough problems without adding awkward jokes to the list. But I wasn't joking. The truth is, I had been living alone in a 3-bedroom house that felt too big since my divorce 3 years earlier. My ex-wife had taken most of the furniture and all of the warmth with her. The spare rooms became storage for things I didn't know how to throw away. Used photo albums, a treadmill I never used, boxes labeled a miscellaneous that really meant a memories I'm not ready to face. The house echoed at night. Oh, I filled it with television noise and work deadlines, pretending the silence didn't bother me. Watching Hannah and Milo stare at their future packed into cardboard, something inside me shifted. I knew what it felt like to lose stability, to feel the ground crumble without warning. My divorce hadn't left me homeless, but it had left me hollow. I had survived because friends had offered couches, meals, distractions. Kindness had stitched me back together. Standing there, I realized this was my chance to pass that stitching along. She shook her head when I insisted. Pride and fear wrestled across her face. Accepting help meant admitting she couldn't fix this on her own. It meant trusting a neighbor she barely knew beyond polite exchanges and shared fences. I could see her calculating the risks. A single mother doesn't gamble lightly with her child's safety. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked back into my house, grabbed my spare key, and returned. I placed it in her hand. I told her I would clear out the guest room immediately. I told her there would be no rent until she got back on her feet. I told her she could set boundaries, bring a lock for the bedroom door, invite her sister to stay the first week if that made her feel safer. I told her this wasn't charity, it was community. I told her I meant it. She didn't say yes right away, but she didn't say no again either. The first night they moved in was awkward and quiet. Milo carried his dinosaur in a small duffel bag, walking carefully through my living room as if he were stepping into a museum. Hannah apologized too many times. I kept telling her she didn't need to. We established routines slowly. The guest room became theirs. I moved my office into one of the storage rooms. I cleared space in the fridge and labeled shelves so she wouldn't feel like a visitor. We agreed on shared chores, grocery contributions when she could manage them, and a plan for how long this would last. 3 months to start, reassess after. Despite my confidence on the porch, doubts crept in at night. What if this changed everything? What if she thought I expected something in return? What if I overstepped? What if I failed them somehow? Kindness is simple in theory, complicated in practice, demands vulnerability from both sides. But something unexpected happened. The house began to feel alive again. Mornings filled with the clatter of cereal bowls and the sound of Milo practicing spelling words at the kitchen table. Hannah found temporary work cleaning offices in the evenings, and I adjusted my schedule so I could be home when Milo got back from school. At first, he was shy around me, offering one-word answers and disappearing into the guest room. Slowly, though, he started lingering. We built a model airplane one Saturday afternoon. He told me about a classmate who teased him for wearing the same sneakers every day. I told him those sneakers looked fast enough to outrun anyone's opinion. Hannah carried guilt like a shadow. I saw it in the way she scrubbed the counters after I had already cleaned them, in the way she tried to pay for groceries with money she clearly needed for other things. I reminded her, gently and often, that this arrangement wasn't a debt ledger. It was a bridge. Bridges are meant to be crossed, not repaid plank by plank. The biggest challenge wasn't financial. It was emotional. Hannah had been surviving for so long that she didn't know how to rest. Even when she found a part-time position at a small catering company, she worked herself to exhaustion. The fear driving her. The fear of slipping again, of seeing another notice taped to another door. One evening after Milo had gone to bed, she confessed that asking for help felt like failure. She had promised herself she would never need anyone again. I told her strength isn't measured by how much you can carry alone. It's measured by how willing you are to let someone share the weight. I wasn't trying to sound wise. I was speaking from the ruins of my own stubborn pride. Weeks turned into months. Hannah's hours at the catering company increased. Her reliability caught the owner's attention, and she was offered a steady position managing events. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Milo's laughter became a regular soundtrack in the house. The guest room walls filled with his drawings. My once silent evenings transformed into shared dinners and occasional board games that lasted longer than they should because none of us wanted them to end. Somewhere along the way, the arrangement stopped feeling temporary. It started feeling like family. That realization scared me more than the eviction notice ever had. I had opened my home out of compassion, not expectation. But emotions don't follow contracts. They grow quietly, like ivy along a wall, until one day you notice how much space they occupy. I found myself looking forward to Hannah's footsteps in the hallway, to the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she laughed. I caught myself imagining what it would be like if this wasn't just a season, but a future. I didn't act on those feelings, not at first. She needed stability, not romance complicating her recovery. So I focused on what I could control. Being present, being dependable, being kind without strings attached. 6 months after that cold afternoon, Hannah came home with a different expression on her face. Not exhaustion, not worry. Something lighter. She had been approved for a small apartment across town close to Milo's school and her job. The rent was manageable. The lease was in her name alone. She told me she was ready. The news hit me with conflicting waves. Pride swelled in my chest. She had done it. She had crossed the bridge, but beneath that pride was a quiet ache. The house would return to silence. The cereal bowls would disappear. The laughter would fade back into memory. On their last night under my roof, we sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were cleared. Milo had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching his dinosaur. Hannah looked around the room with a softness that mirrored the day she had first arrived. Only this time, it wasn't grief in her eyes. It was gratitude. She told me that when I offered my key on that porch, she thought it was a cruel joke because life had taught her not to expect rescue. She said I had restored something she thought was gone forever. Trust. Oh. As they loaded their belongings into a borrowed truck the next morning, I felt the same wind that had once rattled an eviction notice. But this time, it carried hope instead of dread. I hugged Milo, who promised to visit and help me build a bigger airplane next time. Hannah held my gaze a second longer than usual. There were words in that silence, unfinished, unspoken, but understood. After they drove away, the house felt quiet again. But it wasn't the same hollow quiet as before. It was a full quiet, the kind that comes after something meaningful. I walked into the guest room and noticed a small drawing taped inside the closet. It was a picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house. Above them, Milo had written in uneven letters, "Home is where people help you." If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters. Your engagement helps these messages of hope reach farther than we ever could alone. Here's my special request before the ending. Comment the word home if you believe that home is more than walls and a roof. A week later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Hannah standing there, Milo bouncing beside her. She wasn't holding boxes this time. She was holding a small potted plant. She said their new place was good, but something felt incomplete. She said independence didn't mean isolation. She asked if I would come to dinner at their apartment that evening. That dinner turned into many more. The distance between our houses didn't shrink, but the distance between our lives did. We moved slowly, carefully, building something rooted in respect and shared history rather than urgency. The foundation was already there, laid on a cold afternoon when a simple offer sounded like a joke. Looking back, I realized that proving I meant it wasn't about handing over a key. It was about consistency. It was about showing up every day without hidden agendas. It was about understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door and trust that kindness will not leave you empty. In a world where doors are often closed out of fear, that small act changed 3 lives. It gave Hannah the stability to stand again. It gave Milo a season of safety he will remember long after the details fade. And it gave me a reminder that healing doesn't come from protecting your heart at all costs. It comes from letting it risk being needed. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away. Like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Tell us about a time someone opened a door for you, or a time you opened one for someone else. Because sometimes the difference between despair and hope is a neighbor who refuses to let an eviction notice be the final word. The months after that first dinner in Hannah's new apartment unfolded with a quiet, deliberate grace. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. We didn't wake up the next morning transformed into a perfect, ready-made family. Instead, we chose each other in small, ordinary ways that felt almost invisible to the outside world but monumental to us. Her apartment was smaller than my house had been, but it carried a warmth that mine never did before they arrived. The walls were freshly painted a pale gray, and Milo's drawings were already taped up in uneven rows. There was a faint smell of cinnamon from a candle Hannah lit every evening, as if she was determined to make this place not just livable, but comforting. The first time I stepped inside, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Ownership, not just of the lease, but of her life. She had done this, on her own feet, but independence didn't erase connection. It refined it. I began stopping by after work a few nights a week. Sometimes I brought groceries. Sometimes I brought nothing but myself. Milo insisted I sit at the small kitchen table while he did homework, asking me to quiz him on spelling or listen to his dramatic retelling of recess soccer matches. Hannah would move around the kitchen with a steadiness that replaced the frantic exhaustion she once carried. There was still stress, bills still arrived, work still demanded long hours, but the desperation was gone. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, the power flickered out. Milo froze mid-sentence, eyes wide with old fear. I recognized that look immediately. It was the same one he had worn on the porch the day of the eviction. Darkness had once meant instability. Without thinking, I stood and found the flashlight on my phone. Hannah lit a few candles. Within minutes, the apartment glowed in soft amber light. We sat on the living room floor, shadows dancing on the walls, and turned the blackout into an adventure. Milo built a blanket fort. Hannah laughed in a way that felt unguarded. In that dim, flickering light, I realized something profound. Stability isn't the absence of storms. It's knowing you won't face them alone. Still, I hesitated with my feelings. I had promised myself that my initial offer had no strings attached. And it hadn't. But as weeks turned into nearly a year since that eviction notice, the unspoken current between Hannah and me grew stronger. It lived in the way our hands brushed when passing plates, in the quiet pauses at the end of the night when neither of us wanted to say goodbye first. The real test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Hannah called me while I was in the middle of a work meeting. She rarely called during the day, so I excused myself and answered immediately. Milo had gotten into a fight at school. A classmate had mocked their past situation, repeating something he'd overheard from his parents about a people who can't pay their rent. Milo had shoved him, not hard, but hard enough to land in the principal's office. When I arrived at the school, I found Milo sitting rigidly in a plastic chair, jaw clenched, eyes red but refusing to cry. Hannah stood beside him, equal parts angry and heartbroken. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Eviction wasn't just an event. It left fingerprints. It followed you into classrooms and playgrounds. On the drive home, silence hung heavy in the car. That night, after Milo fell asleep, Hannah sat across from me at her kitchen table and admitted she feared that no matter how far they moved forward, the past would always chase them. She worried Milo would carry shame he didn't deserve. I told her shame only grows in silence. So the next weekend, I took Milo out for a long walk by the river. We talked about mistakes adults make, about how money problems don't define a person's worth. I told him that courage sometimes looks like starting over in a new apartment and still showing up to school every day. I told him I admired his mom more than he could understand. Something shifted after that. Milo began introducing me to people as part of his team. Not dad, not uncle, just team. It was simple, but it meant everything. Hannah noticed it too. The fear that once guarded her eyes softened into trust. The night everything finally changed wasn't dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no rehearsed speeches. It was late autumn. The air outside had turned sharp again, eerily similar to the day of the eviction. We had just finished dinner and Milo was asleep in his room. I stood near the door ready to head home when Hannah stopped me. She looked at me the same way she had on the porch months ago, uncertain, vulnerable, but this time there was no bitterness in her expression, only honesty. She told me that when I handed her that key, she thought kindness like that didn't exist outside of movies. She had spent so long believing she had to fight every battle alone that accepting help felt like weakness. But living through that season had taught her something different. It had shown her that strength could coexist with support. Then she said she didn't want our connection to be temporary anymore. The words settled between us, steady and real. I felt every wall I had carefully maintained begin to crumble, not from fear, but from relief. I told her I hadn't rushed because I didn't want her to feel obligated. I wanted her to choose freely, not out of gratitude or dependency. She stepped closer, closing the space that had lingered for months, and for the first time, our future felt less like a possibility and more like a direction. We didn't rush after that either. We dated slowly. We talked about everything. Expectations, boundaries, fears. We included Milo in conversations about what it would mean if our lives blended more permanently. His only concern was whether I would still help with science projects. A year after that first knock on my door, Hannah and Milo moved again. But this time, it wasn't because they were forced out. It was because we chose to build something together. We renovated my house instead of selling it. The once empty guest room became Milo's bedroom. The treadmill finally left the storage room. Old boxes labeled miscellaneous were sorted and donated. The house didn't just gain furniture, it gained intention. On the day Hannah officially moved back in, not as someone in crisis, but as my partner. We stood on the same porch where everything had started. The siding was the same faded brown. The air carried the same crisp bite, but instead of boxes and fear, there were potted plants and laughter. Milo ran up the steps ahead of us, unlocking the door with a key we had given him that morning. He declared himself a co-captain of the household. Hannah squeezed my hand, and I felt something deeper than romance. I felt alignment. We never forgot where it began. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how easily I could have stayed inside that afternoon when I saw the eviction notice. I could have told myself it wasn't my problem. I could have assumed someone else would help. Instead, I stepped onto a porch and offered a key. It didn't fix everything overnight. It didn't erase hardship, but it created a turning point. If this continuation of their journey touched your heart, if you believe small acts of courage can ripple into lifelong change, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still exists, and leave a comment telling us about a moment when someone showed up for you unexpectedly. Your engagement helps these stories travel further than we ever could alone. Because here's the truth I've learned. You rarely see the full impact of a single decision in the moment you make it. Offering my home felt simple, almost impulsive, but that choice became the foundation for love, healing, and a family none of us saw coming. The eviction notice is long gone. The paper disintegrated, the ink faded, but the courage it demanded from all of us remains. It lives in the way Hannah walks confidently into her job every day. It lives in Milo's laughter echoing down the hallway. It lives in the quiet comfort of knowing that home is no longer fragile. Home is chosen. And sometimes it begins with 4 simple words that sound like a joke until you prove they're not. Move in with me.